Chapter 21 today, the lymphatic and immune system. And we are starting from the lymphatic system. Here is your table of contents. And the first question, why we study two systems together? Well, first let's give definitions. The lymphatic system is a system of vessels, cells, and organs that carries excess fluids from the tissues to the bloodstream and filters that fluid from pathogens from the blood. Pathogens, those are bacteria, viruses, and other microorganisms causing disease. The immune system is a complex collection of cells and organs that destroys or neutralizes pathogens that would otherwise cause disease or death. And most of those cells and organs are shared with the lymphatic system. So, those two systems, the lymphatic system and immune system, are associated to such a degree. They are interconnected and they are virtually indistinguishable. So, we study them together. Lymphatic system goes first. Let's remember blood composition. Blood is made of blood plasma, the fluid, and formed elements. When capillaries bring blood to the tissues, first at the arterial end of capillaries, due to hydrostatic pressure, oxygen and nutrients go from the blood to the cells, but not only oxygen and nutrients, but also some amount of blood plasma with some plasma proteins. They leak into the tissues too. Most of that fluid, which now is called interstitial fluid, it's located between the cells and blood vessels, so most of it will be reabsorbed at the venous end of the capillary due to the osmotic colloid pressure. But because osmotic colloid pressure is lower than hydrostatic pressure, some amount of fluid, interstitial fluid, stays between the cells. And if that fluid is not collected, it will cause swelling, edema. So interstitial fluid goes into the lymphatic vessels, or simply lymphatics, those green vessels, and from now, it's called lymph. And together with lymphoid organs and tissues, lymphatic system provides the structural basis of the immune system. Structure of the lymphatic system. Let's just name those structures. So, tiny lymphatic vessels collecting interstitial fluid, now it's lymph, they continue and turn into the larger lymphatic vessels called trunks and ducts. We have lymphatic vessels all over the body. They are green in this picture. Also inside there will be lymphoid cells. We also have lymphoid tissues, lymph nodes all over the place. Here are lymph nodes, for example. Here are lymph nodes. We have spleen. It's also part of the lymphatic system. We have thymus. It's a gland located at the top of the heart. And we have tonsils. You remember tonsils from the respiratory system. Lymphatic system is a one-way system because lymph flows toward the heart only. Tiny lymphatic capillaries collect extra intercellular fluid, interstitial fluid, and then they merge together and form larger lymphatic vessels that have valves. Those lymphatic vessels carry the blood through lymphatic nodes. The lymph carries the lymph through the lymphatic nodes. Inside of them, the lymph is cleaned from bacteria, viruses, cancer cells, and finally, large lymphatic trunks and ducts return that fluid back to the blood, entering to vena cava. The tiniest lymphatic vessels are called lymphatic capillaries. Where they are located? So that is your capillary bed, somewhere in the tissues, arterial, venule, and capillary bed where gas exchange and nutrients exchange happens. So, as I told you before, some portion of that fluid of blood plasma does not return back to their venule and stays between the tissues. We call it interstitial fluid. Lymphatic capillaries, starting right here at their ends, pick up that fluid, and now it's called lymph. Together with fluid, debris, cell debris, pathogens, different types of bacteria, viruses, and cancer cells go into lymphatic capillaries too. So they clean that space between the cells. Every capillaries, and that is the end of lymphatic vessel, is right here. That is the end of the lymphatic vessel, or probably it would be more correct to say the beginning of the lymphatic vessel. It's made of one layer of cells, flat cells, endothelial cells, and there are spaces between those cells, tiny valves that open only one way. Fluid gets into them, but it doesn't go back. So one-way mini valves. And collagen fibers attaching those lymphatic capillary wall cells, they create a pressure inside, negative pressure, that actually sucks that fluid out of the interstitial space into the lymphatic capillaries. So collagen fibers prevent collapsing of lymphatic capillaries. We have lymphatic capillaries everywhere in the body, with exception of bones, teeth, bone marrow, and the central nervous system, brain, spinal cord. Lacteals is a specialized type of lymphatic capillaries that we have in the small intestine. Our small intestines digest food, and food is absorbed into the blood. Most of our nutrients, like vitamins, proteins, carbs, and blood through the hepatic portal vein, carries all those nutrients to the liver for processing. Fats are exceptions. Fats are digested not into the blood vessels, but into the specific lacteals, lymphatic capillaries. And lymph carries those fats straight through the blood, left subclavian vein, so it doesn't go through the liver. Large lymphatic vessels that are going through our arms, legs, trunk, they have thinner walls if we compare them to veins, and they have more internal valves, but actually they have very similar structure to the veins. The anastomoses connect to each other, interconnect more frequently, and the nutrients are supplied to their walls of large vessels through the vasa vasorum, tiny blood vessels, same way like it happens with large blood vessels. Now let's talk about major lymphatic ducts. Here's, for example, thoracic duct right here, and trunks. The smaller lymphatic vessels eventually merge and form larger trunks and ducts. The right lymphatic duct receives lymph from only the upper right side of the body. Here it is, right side of the head and neck, right arm, right shoulder, and right side of their thoracic cavity. All that lymph collected from that part of the body is collected to the right lymphatic duct, which enters to right subclavian vein, and right subclavian vein carries it into the vena cava superior. The lymph from the rest of the body, all that lymph, including abdominal cavity and both legs, goes into their thoracic duct. Here it is, thoracic duct, which enters left subclavian vein and then vena cava superior. The superficial lymphatic vessels follow the same routes as veins. It means that many of the lymphatic vessels are located right under the skin and they are sitting very close to veins. But we also have deep lymphatic vessels, and they generally located next to the arteries. Before you continue, please answer the questions for part 1.1. There are three forces that propel lymph up through the lymphatic vessels. Most of lymph goes up. First of all, if they are located lymphatic vessels, if they are next to their arteries, then pulsations of those arteries can help to propel lymph. Next one, in the walls of the large lymphatics, there is some amount of smooth muscle that contracts and also helps to move lymph. But the main mechanism would be the same like for veins, contractions of the skeletal muscles. When we are moving, walking for example, the skeletal muscles in our legs contract, squeeze lymphatic vessels, move the lymph up, and when muscles relax, lymph doesn't go back down because of the valves preventing backflow. That condition is called lymphedema. What can cause it? It's a blockage of the lymphatic vessels. How can it happen? For example, if a woman had a breast cancer and that cancer was removed, and if it was stage 2, usually they also remove lymphatic vessels and lymphatic nodes, so the flow of lymph was interrupted. Those lymphatic vessels are removed and lymph doesn't have where to go. Interstitial fluid is collected in the tissues, causing swelling. That's called lymphedema. Later, the collateral lymphatic vessels will develop, and that condition will disappear, but it takes time. Lymphatic system inside of the vessels, in the lymph, inside of the organs, has a lot of cells that work for the immune system. And you need to know their names now. So first will be lymphocytes, T cells and B cells. So T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. They protect us against antigens. Remember red blood cells. We have or we don't have certain antigens, proteins on their surface, glycoproteins. And the other cells and other organisms like bacteria, this is bacterium, and viruses on their surface, they also have antigens. Our lymphatic system and our immune cells are capable to recognize those foreign antigens and destroy them. So antigens would be anything the body perceives as foreign: bacteria, their toxins, viruses, mismatched red blood cells, and cancer cells. Other cells we'll talk about are plasma cells and natural killer cells. So two types of lymphocytes. T cells or T lymphocytes, they attack antigens, foreign antigens inside of the cells. If virus hijacked the cell and being reproduced inside of that cell, immune response with help of T cells will attack and destroy either foreign cell or cell invaded with viruses. B cells work outside of the cells, not in the cells but outside, in the lymph, in the blood, and they produce plasma cells. Actually, it would be correct to say that they become plasma cells which secrete antibodies. So plasma cells, definition for them would be B cells that have differentiated in response to antigen binding and gained the ability to secrete antibodies. Natural killer cells are circulating the blood all the time, and they have cytotoxic granules. Cytotoxic, it means they are toxic for the cells, or cell-killing granules in its cytoplasm, so they can destroy virally infected cells. Now let's talk about lymphoid organs, primary lymphoid organs. That would be bone marrow and thymus. Why are they primary? Because that's where all the cells of the lymphatic system are produced, T cells, B cells. The lymphoid organs where lymphocytes mature, proliferate, and are selected to do their job, which enables them to attack pathogens. B cells are born and mature in the red bone marrow. Bone B cells. That's why they're called B cells. T cells are also born in the red bone marrow, but for maturation they leave the bone marrow and go to the thymus. That's why they are called T cells. They mature in the thymus. That's in the picture. You can see bone marrow with blood cells are being produced in it. So thymus, it's a gland, it's an organ where T cells mature. It's actually a gland because it is capable to produce some hormone-like chemicals. It's a bilobed organ made of 2 lobes located superior to the heart, right, on the top of the heart. And it's small in adults, but it's large in size during the childhood. That's the only organ probably that is large in children, then stops growing and even shrinks, atrophies in adults. So inside of the thymus, there are connective tissue walls, here they are, dividing it into lobules. So that would be one lobule. And each lobule has cortex, outer layer, and medulla, the central layer. In the cortex, there will be a lot of lymphocytes and some macrophages. In the medulla, there will be less lymphocytes, but there will be special corpuscles. They are called thymic or Hassel's corpuscles that are involved in regulatory T cell development. So that's where development in their medulla, development of T lymphocytes mostly happens. Thymus is different from other lymphoid organs in several ways. First of all, it has main function, maturation of T cells. And itself, thymus does not fight antigen. It just provides soldiers, T cells, to fight antigens later, when they are released from it. So, the thymocytes inside of the thymus, here they are, in the cortex, provides the environment in which T lymphocytes become immunocompetent. We will talk much more about T lymphocytes, how they mature, how they become immunocompetent when we discuss the immune system chapter. Now, before you continue, please stop the video and answer the questions for chapter 21, part 1.2. Secondary lymphoid organs. So primary lymphoid organs would be bone marrow and thymus, where T and B lymphocytes are born and where they mature. But where they mount immune responses, where they do their job, that is called secondary lymphoid organs, lymph nodes, spleen, and lymphoid nodules. Those organs have a lot in common. They usually have internal structure made of reticular fibers, thin, fine reticular fibers, and main function of their fibers, those fibers, is to fix and keep in place a lot of macrophages. Also, there will be germinal centers, which are sites of rapidly dividing and differentiating B lymphocytes. So, even if B lymphocytes are born in bone marrow and mature there, they still can divide in other organs, in germinal centers. If some things about T and B lymphocytes, about immune system, are not very clear for you now, that's completely okay, because we will be talking about them again when we start the immune system. So, location of lymphatic nodes. They are main principal lymphoid organs of the body, and they are everywhere. They are in our arms, in our legs, popliteal in the knee areas. Inguinal are the main regions of lymphatic nodes that collect lymph from their leg and clean it. and the axillary region collects and cleans the lymph from the arms, cervical lymphatic nodes from the head and neck. Then we have mediastinal that clean thoracic cavity lymph, and mesenteric abdominal cavity, lots of lymphatic nodes. Lymph nodes have two main functions. One is a function of their lymphatic system. They filter lymph, and a lot of those macrophages, huge white blood cells attached to those reticular fibers, they destroy microorganisms and debris. How they do it? They are huge. They take those bacteria inside in vesicles and digest and take them apart. Immune system function, T and B lymphocytes right there, they are working attacking antigens, and again we will be discussing that part with the immune system chapter. Structure of the lymph nodes. They have a bean-shaped structure. They are covered with a capsule. Inside there will be trabecules made of connective tissue that divide them in several compartments, and inside of each compartment you can find a cortex and medulla. So here's on the microscopic slide you can see cortex, and right here there would be medulla. In the cortex mostly you can find follicles with germinal centers where you can find a lot of B cells that are dividing. And also there will be T cells in transit, moving from one part of the body to another one. T cells circulate all the time, going from the blood to lymphatic nodes, from lymph nodes to the blood, and through the lymph. So lymph enters lymph nodes through their afferent lymphatic vessels. Usually there are 3, 4, or 5 of those, and lymph travels through the sinuses, larger and smaller ones, and exits lymphatic nodes through the afferent lymphatic vessels. There are always few of afferent vessels, 1, 2, maximum 3. That causes slowing down of the flow of the lymph. So those lymphocytes inside of the nose and those macrophages would have time to carry out their functions, which are cleaning the lymph from cell debris, pathogens, which are bacteria, viruses, and also cancer cells. Before you continue, please stop and answer the questions for part 1.3. The largest organ of their lymphatic system would be spleen. Spleen is located in the right upper quadrant of the abdominal cavity, and it is anterior to the kidney and lateral to the pancreas. In the hilum right here, splenic artery and vein enter and exit the organ. It's a pretty large organ. Spleen has several functions. First of all, it's a site of lymphocyte proliferation and immune surveillance and response. That's part we are going to talk about with the immune system. Also, spleen cleanses the blood of aged cells, all of them red blood cells, white blood cells, and also platelets and cell debris. It's a special story about red blood cells. Usually they live for up to 4 months, 3-4 months, and after that they break in the spleen, and those breakdown products, like iron for example, can be stored in their spleen for a while and reused later. Also, it's site of blood platelets storage. And in a fetus, before the fetus is born and becomes a baby, erythrocytes, red blood cells, are made in the spleen, which stops after the birth. Can you answer why? Think about it, please. Spleen structure. Spleen is covered with a thick fibrous capsule with trabecules going into it and separating it into several parts, pulps. Two areas in the spleen that you can see under the microscope would be white pulp. Usually you can find that area next to the arterioles, and red pulp. So white pulp mostly contains lymphocytes and they carry immune function, killing pathogens. Red pulp takes care of red blood cells. There are a lot of macrophages there for disposal of worn out red blood cells and other blood cells, and also cell debris and all those pathogens, they are disposed in the red pulp. Next organ, lymphoid nodules, tonsils. They are not nodes, they are nodules. What is the difference? Nodules do not have a capsule. They are not covered with connective tissue capsules. And nodes, they do have a capsule. It's a simplest lymphoid organ, and there we have several of them. So right here, palatine tonsils at the posterior end of the oral cavity, and usually when doctors look in your mouth and they ask you to say that's what they see, those palatine tonsils. Lingual tonsils are sitting at the base posterior of the tongue. Pharyngeal tonsils are in the nasopharynx. And you cannot see it in this picture, but we also have tiny tubal tonsils that surround the openings of the auditory tubes or eustachian tubes or pharyngotympanic tubes that connect tympanic cavity in our middle ear into with our pharynx. Tonsils have follicles with germinal centers inside of them, where there are a lot of blood cells, white blood cells. And those white blood cells are capable for phagocytosis. Special cracks in their tonsils that are called crypts allow saliva with food that we consume to go into the tonsils, and that's where bacteria and viruses and particulate matter will be trapped and destroyed. MALT is mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, and it's made of lymphoid follicles in their mucous membrane epithelia. So where we have them, everywhere where we have mucous membranes, like lungs, for example, in the eyes, gastrointestinal tract, and they protect our digestive and respiratory systems from foreign matter. Those are very small pieces of tissue, they are not organs. And finally, also pretty small Peyer's patches can be found in the wall of the distal portion of the small intestine. And sitting there, they destroy bacteria, if still there are any bacteria inside of the lumen of small intestine, preventing those bacteria from breaching the intestinal wall and getting into our blood. Please remember to answer the questions for part 1.4.